Hey, welcome to G-Cloud Days. My name is Payam Ebrahimi. I'm the CTO of Devoteam G-Cloud Netherlands. Today I'm going to be talking about what goes under the hood in Kubernetes that can be valuable for you and for your business. So we are going to start with two candidates to make the examples a little bit more reliable. These candidates are selected based on the profiles we normally deal with on a day-to-day basis in our customer base, but they are not representing any specific customer. So first candidate is John, and John is the CTO of an enterprise-grade company. He has a lot of responsibilities per day, and he has to take care of a lot of things and move them throughout the day. And our second candidate is Matt. And what Matt is focused on is he's leading a small team of a digital native company. He also has a lot of responsibilities, but he might have different kinds of concerns than Matt has. And both of these are exploring these solutions that can answer their requirements. So let's look at some of the requirements together. First for Matt, we have, let's start with actually John on the left side. We have the infrastructure modernization. If you're an enterprise-grade company, you often have an already existing infrastructure. And your concern is not about starting from scratch, but it's more about, hey, how can I move to the next step? And this is one of them you're always concerned about. And you often have a lot of infrastructure and operational costs that you want to reduce the operational costs and focus on what brings value for your business. And it's also a big concern with enterprises that how are we going to handle developer turnovers? Because it's not that easy to train existing developers on new technologies that could lead into issues and problems and resilience on the side of the developers. And the modern way of thinking about the consumption is we want to pay per use or pay as we go instead of paying a bulk of money per month, whether we use it or not. And automation is a concern there, and we would like to use a solution that has security embedded in it in place of security being something that now needs to be handled differently. On case of Matt, if you look at it, normally they would like to, this kind of companies and their CTOs, they would like to go to the market quickly. They would like to, again, focus on what brings them value, but from a different perspective here. We are not talking about infrastructure ops costs, but it's more about, hey, we have limited sets of developers and I don't want to focus on everything. I want to automate as much as possible and hand over some of that work. They want to stay very close to best practices. They want to be trained on best practices. And one of the other things that Matt might be concerned about, like John, is like, how can we do automations? And in digital natives, sometimes we see that one of the other concerns is we want security. We want to take it very seriously, but we want to also have flexibility at the same time. So from those requirements, if I want to categorize them, basically we have these topics. We have security, managing spend. It doesn't matter if it's in enterprise or in digital native. Lack of resources of experience in where we want to go, not necessarily where we are right now. Governance, compliance, and performance and support, like always. So now let's see how we can address this from a specific point of view, and that's where I'm leading at with Kubernetes. So when you're trying to host your compute resources, you have one of these three options. First is you could basically use servers. You can use shared machines. So there are machines shared in the enterprise, or as a digital native, it could even be that you start with a data center. It's not very common, but there are smaller teams that often start like that. They often, with a small server they have or something, they don't want to go beyond that. That's one of the options they look at. The second option is looking at virtualization, virtual machines, which means less hardware to manage. There are some interim solutions you can use. You can use also hypervisation and then have shared resources that way. And the last but not least is containerization. Containerization is this relatively new topic. There are a lot of interest in it on many sides, newcomers and people who have already been in the industry, because it brings some values. Let's look at some of the values containerization can bring for you. First of all, you will have an immutable infrastructure. When you create a container, it's immutable, it remains there. Everything is versioned on top of the previous layer like an onion, and it increases your deployment time, reliability. You can, as I said, version them. You can create isolation, and containers are portable. You can run them basically anywhere with some caveats. And you could easily also share your containers with others and they can leverage them. But one downside of just focusing on containerization is if you have a lot of containers, you would like interoperability between them. You would like to be able to create an infrastructure and environment that these containers can communicate securely, and you want to create isolation between them. And the question always is, how can we do that? So here we can see the value and benefit of Kubernetes. Kubernetes is basically, if you want to refer to it simplified, it's an operating system for your compute fleet. It's a container orchestration layer. And it takes care of many things that you normally have as concern. So you would like to have scheduling, schedule these containers. You would like to be able to manage the life cycle and health of those containers. You would like to scale them, meaning if more jobs coming my way, I would like to deploy more containers to take care of that. You would like to be able to load balance between these containers, and then the rest is more like storage management, logging, and debugging when there is issues. These are all the things that Kubernetes addresses for you, and you don't need to do that work yourself from the operational perspective. So everything in Kubernetes is API based. You have interactions via APIs with the Kubernetes master, and Kubernetes master communicates with the nodes you have, which are hosted on any compute solution that you can choose. There are some limitations, but I'm not going to focus on them right now because we are talking very generically. But basically, you have a master, which is a distributed solution itself. You communicate with that master, and that master makes sure your resources or containers are all orchestrated and taken care of. So one benefit you get in here is you can get the container. So it has the smallest unit, if you want to refer to it in Kubernetes, is a pod. And pod is a grouping and isolation of containers together. And inside the pod, containers have access to one another. And you could have different grouping of the containers. I'm not going to be too specific here again because we don't want to go too deep in it, but we have, if you check our website, some blog posts in there that you can look at, and they go into details. And you can always reach out if there was any questions, and I'm happy to address them, or someone in my team can address it. So in here, you can create isolation of groups of containers, individual containers, and you could easily bring them to life and reschedule them as you need them. And that's very great. Kubernetes on its own. So basically, you can even think of it as like a mini cloud on its own. But how does that come to the picture when we come to Google Cloud? Because maybe there we can even go one step higher. So the first thing you get is when you bring Kubernetes in Google Cloud, you will not just have one isolated Kubernetes on its own, you also have interoperability with already existing managed solutions of Google, managed databases, managed analytical solutions, and messaging queues and all of that. Then you have integration with other solutions that you may need in the future, like AI solutions, data analytics solutions, which are not your concern necessarily right now, but in the future you would like to be able to have that. And then security is in Kubernetes by design, but also you leverage that highly when you come in Google Cloud, because Google Cloud is secure by design itself, all the components that are. It's a core component of Google Cloud. And when it comes to networking, it's one of the issues that you often reach. In Google, you can and you are going to be leveraging the Google Global Private Network. Here's a picture of Google Global Network. So when you, I mean, this is a little bit old, this slide I have, but still speaks volumes, because in here you have a global available network that all your resources can communicate privately. You can distribute your clusters in many different regions and move everything in Google Private Network without going to the public internet. Moreover, you get to leverage, you get freedom here. You can choose how many clusters you need. You can isolate your production, development, QA, and staging from one another, and have different teams being governed and manage their identity and access while they are using Kubernetes. Another thing in here is you could decide, because you can always host Kubernetes on your own, but in Google, if you're using Google Kubernetes engine, by default, you can deploy it on a zonal level, like a data center in a region, on a multi-zonal level, like multi-data sets in one region, or a regional cluster, which, again, this is a little bit going too technical here, but we have some blog posts, and Google has a lot of free online materials for those who are technical here and want to dig deeper into it to study. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out, and we can always discuss these things further. We can also go one step further. If you already come to Google Cloud, you have some managed Kubernetes. So this is, let's look at this diagram by Google. You can do Kubernetes on your own. You can host it on a private data center on your own. When you bring it to Google Managed Kubernetes, Google Kubernetes Engine, a lot of that work that you do on your own is reduced, right? You still have to do some work yourself, like managing your nodes, some security and networking you have to do yourself, but a significant amount of work is reduced, and you can focus on looking at all your problems as software problems, right? You no longer have to be concerned with any hardware management, anything like that. Kubernetes to some extent takes that away, but like when you do it in Google Cloud, that is reduced significantly. But there's also a further option, which in Google Cloud is referred to as Google Autopilot, which takes away some of that toil and hurdle that you normally have when you run a normal Google Kubernetes engine. So it's just a balance you have to find, whether you want to gain a little bit more flexibility or you want to focus more on the development of the business values and things that brings value to your business. And the beauty of this is the GKE Autopilot is basically GKE. Nothing changes. So if you are very much into using open source technologies and you still would like to have flexibility and saying, hey, I would like to make sure I can run this cluster anywhere else I want, you're still using GKE, but you gain some values, like you receive an SLA from Google for some parts, and you already go to production faster, and basically you also reduce, you don't eliminate, but you reduce the day two operation. So once you go to production, some of that work you normally have to do to gain some insights in here is done for you, for managing nodes and all of that. So it's just that extra level to go to still remain within the Kubernetes ecosystem, but have a more managed by Google solution instead of you doing that layer of work. And then we have the option of hybrid infrastructure in Google Cloud. Basically, hybrid infrastructure focuses on having your on-premise and other cloud resources communicate to one another. And here, the idea is if you just want to focus on Kubernetes, you can imagine having a Kubernetes cluster on-premise, having a Kubernetes cluster in Amazon, having a Kubernetes cluster in Google Cloud, and how you integrate these with one another, have interoperability between them seamlessly. And there we have the topic of Anthos. It's not the focus of this talk, but I can refer many good reading materials about it. We have a blog post about it. If you just look for that topic, Anthos, why bother? You can find a lot of reading materials about it. And Google has fantastic documentations online. You can look at it. Basically, that's like that level for some of the enterprise customers or some customers who want to have a hybrid setup of Kubernetes. So you get a lot of options in here between hosting it from scratch yourself, coming to cloud, and following best practices recommended by Google and using the same infrastructure as Google, and it will really make that a breeze for you that way. And then you can also still have the hybrid setup between Google Cloud and the rest of environments that you might have. So there is this part that I'm going to do a quick recap first. So remember, we had like two candidates. They had some concerns. They had the concern of security. They have the concern of managing their spend, lack of resources, that they either have to train resources from scratch or they don't have a lot of people to do their operational work. Governance was an issue, and compliance and performance and support. So coming to the cloud addresses a lot of these problems already. Going to Kubernetes addresses this already. But to extend that, we have the concept of partnership. So partners are these are companies like us who work in conjunction with Google. So it's like a triangle relationship between us and the customer. And we help you even going one step further. So if you look at how some of these can be addressed, for example, lack of resources and expertise, you need to focus on training. You need to focus on turnover of engineers in their own pace. So there are online materials you can follow, but also you can rely on partners for training. And that's one of those things we bring to the table. And this is not specific to Kubernetes per se, but it's a good fit here if you're just thinking Kubernetes. For governance, Kubernetes offers you a lot of out-of-the-box governance options. When you bring it to Google Cloud, you go one layer above that. But you normally deploy your resources as a software, as like a procedure of software codes that are running, right? They're referred to as infrastructure as code. So this infrastructure as code is a code you write to deploy your infrastructure when you come to cloud, or even on premise. You write some shell scripts. I mean, they are not always like declarative like infrastructure, but you want to automate all of that. So you want to have some governance on top of that, and you want to use infrastructure as code written by people who already have done that many times, so you can already leverage that, right? Or you want your infrastructure as code that exists to be reviewed. You want your platform to be reviewed. So that's one of those parts that if you don't want to just stay at the level that you get out of the box, you can extend it through a partner, and the partner can help you take that to the next level. And regarding compliance, this is something that it's really like, as I said, in that triangle relationship. So Google has their part, we play our own role in here, and the portion that is on your shoulder is significantly reduced, and you don't have to focus on that fully. You can just challenge that. And performance, again, this is it's twofold. One part of it is, hey, performance for me is just going to the cloud, and how would my performance be improved? The other is about performance optimization after you come to the cloud. So there again, the role of partner together with Google can be very significant, because they can help you with evaluating your existing infrastructure and providing you advice over where to go next. So this is basically the journey when you set up anything in the cloud. You always have a governance layer on the bottom, and then you deploy your resources in a specific order. You have an enterprise foundation that does identity and access management, networking, monitoring, all of that. And then you have a layer on top of that for the technology stacks that you have, and then it comes to your applications. And as a partner, we offer a standardized framework. That's the work that you normally have to do to get there, but we can accelerate that work with offering a foundational layer for you and different layers for your application stack and technology choices and all of that. For example, in case of Kubernetes, there are best practices recommended by Google. You have to start, you have to always stay in compliance with Google, but we do that on a day-to-day basis quite a lot. And we have some standardized frameworks and accelerators for Kubernetes, which we can help you either develop your frameworks faster, or you can leverage them directly and get the value immediately. So I think I'm running a little bit out of time for the part I wanted to speak. I'm not sure if we have the ability to go through the questions, but if that's not the case, feel free to always reach out. And I want to thank you for your time, and we're looking forward to have some engagement together. Thank you.